Jonathan Miles was once a rising art prodigy, until tragedy shattered his world. Now 48, he's a cold, work-obsessed CEO in San Francisco, pouring everything into an empire built on steel and silence. But one evening, after a tense board meeting, he stops dead in his tracks. On a sidewalk near Golden Gate Park, a 6-year-old girl is drawing a picture. A family of 3 holding hands beneath the iconic red bridge, a scene that mirrors the one Jonathan once sketched for his daughter before she died. The girl's name is Ava. She says she's never met her dad. And her drawing? It came from a dream, she says. But when Jonathan sees the signature in her old sketchbook, his ex-wife's, his world tilts. Is this child his? What begins as a chance encounter quickly becomes a haunting journey through memory, love, and lost time. As public scrutiny intensifies and old enemies try to weaponize his newfound connection, Jonathan must decide. Will he risk his legacy to embrace a family he never knew existed? Stick around, because what this little girl reveals might just lead a broken man back to the home he never stopped needing. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories that reconnect hearts and heal past wounds. Jonathan Miles sat alone at the head of the long-glass conference table, the skyline of San Francisco reflecting off the walls around him like a cold mosaic. 48 years old, CEO of Miles Urban Design. Once a dreamer with charcoal-stained fingers and a heart full of color. Now, he was a man who measured his days in permits, press releases, and price per square foot. The boy who once sketched sunsets had disappeared behind steel and silence. The board meeting had just ended. A tense standoff over zoning conflicts in the Mission District had left the room charged. Jonathan's voice had been calm, but his chest was tight. Not from the deal. He'd won that, as always, but something else. Something that clenched around his ribs like a vice these days. Something hollow. He pulled off his tie the moment the elevator doors closed, exhaling wearily as it dropped to the marble floor. That's enough noise, he muttered to himself, pressing the button for the street. Outside, the late summer light was stretching thin across Market Street, the air warm but edged with evening chill. "Car's waiting," said his driver through the earpiece. Jonathan hesitated. "No," he said, "I need to walk." It had become a quiet ritual. On days like this, days where the walls felt too tight and the city too loud, he would lose himself in the streets. He never had a destination, only the vague hope that movement might stir something in him that the boardroom never could. He turned toward Golden Gate Park, the place his daughter used to love. His feet moved with purpose, though his heart still refused to follow. It had been 10 years since the accident. 10 years since he'd last held his daughter, Lila. 10 years since the storm off the Mendocino coast took both the boat and her laughter. She was 10, exactly 10, and she had begged to go sailing that day. He hadn't said no. He hadn't even said goodbye. Jonathan's marriage had fractured in the months that followed. Emily, his wife, had changed. Or maybe he had. Grief made everything distorted, like water in the eyes. One morning, she was just gone. Her clothes, her sketches, even her laughter vanished from the house. No note, no forwarding address. That was the last time Jonathan had drawn anything. He walked now without purpose, passing tourists with melting ice cream and joggers weaving through traffic. When he reached the corner of Haight and Stanyon, something made him stop. A child was sitting on the sidewalk. She couldn't have been more than 6. Knees scraped, hair pulled into uneven pigtails. She had a small plastic container of sidewalk chalk and was completely absorbed in her work. Around her, a few coins sparkled in an empty paper cup. Jonathan stepped closer, frowning. The drawing on the pavement was startling. Not just because it was good, It was, but because of what it depicted. A family, 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a little girl, holding hands under a fiery orange sunset and a bright red suspension bridge. The Golden Gate. Jonathan's breath caught. That scene, that same composition. He had drawn it dozens of times for Lila. It had been her favorite memory, a family picnic near Crissy Field. He hadn't looked at that drawing in years, but here it was, as if summoned from his past by a child he had never met. He crouched slowly, unsure why his hands were trembling. "That's a beautiful picture," he said gently. The girl looked up, her eyes wide but unafraid. "Thank you," she said softly, brushing chalk dust from her fingers. "Where did you learn to draw that?" Jonathan asked, voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged. "I don't know. I just dreamed it. My mom says dreams are stories we remember from somewhere else." He blinked. "What's your name?" "Ava," she said, smiling shyly. "My mom and I live over there." She pointed toward a rundown motel across the street. "You've never been to the bridge?" She shook her head. "Not really, but I think it's where my real family lives. I draw them sometimes. It helps when I miss them." Jonathan's heart twisted, tangled in emotions he couldn't name. "Your real family?" Ava nodded. "My mom says I never met my dad. She says he used to draw really well too, but he got lost." Jonathan tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it wouldn't budge. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, then paused. It felt wrong, transactional, cold. Instead, he sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. "Do you have more drawings?" he asked gently. Ava opened her backpack and pulled out a worn sketchbook. The moment he saw the cover, time cracked open. It was familiar, deeply, painfully familiar. At the bottom corner of the first page was a signature he hadn't seen in a decade. Emily. Jonathan's breath hitched. He hadn't lost his daughter. He hadn't lost his wife. He'd simply stopped looking. And now, under a golden sky with chalk dust on his shoes, Jonathan Miles realized something that made his world tilt completely off its axis. This little girl might be the piece of his heart he didn't even know was still out there. Jonathan stared at the sketchbook resting on Ava's knees, the faint traces of Emily's handwriting fluttering off the page like whispers from a decade ago. The curve of her E, the elegant slant of her name. He would have known it anywhere. His fingers trembled as they reached forward, stopping just before touching the paper. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly, his voice stretched taut with disbelief. Ava blinked up at him, brushing a wisp of hair from her forehead. "It was my mom's. She says it's the only thing she kept when she left everything behind." She looked at him, innocently unaware of the seismic shift she had caused. "Why? Do you know her?" Jonathan leaned back, his breath shaky. I think I might." That night 10 years ago had played in his mind over and over like a cruel short film on repeat. Emily shouting, he shouting louder, the sharpness of their words, the silence that followed, and the front door slamming shut. He thought she'd gone to punish him, to disappear out of spite. But what if he'd been wrong? What if the silence hadn't been her vengeance, but her pain? "Ava," he said slowly, gently, "what's your mom's name?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Emily Grace. She works a lot, so she's usually tired, but she's really kind, and she always smells like paint." Jonathan let the name settle deep into his chest, where something fragile and half-dead flickered to life. He forced himself to ask, "Would it be all right if I walked you home?" Ava studied him for a moment, cautious but curious. "I guess so. You don't seem like a bad guy." "I'm not," he said, his voice catching. "At least I'm trying not to be." They walked the 3 blocks in silence. Ava skipped ahead now and then, humming a tune only children seemed to know. Jonathan followed, still shaken, still unsure if the universe was playing some cruel trick, or if this was the kind of miracle that didn't announce itself with trumpets, only with chalk drawings on a sidewalk. The motel loomed in front of them like a tired sigh. Faded paint, chipped corners, a rusted-out soda machine humming quietly by the lobby. Room 203, Ava explained as she led him up the cracked stairs, her tiny hand trailing along the metal railing. She knocked softly on the door. "Mom, it's me." There was a pause. Then the door opened, and there she was. Emily. Older, thinner, her hair now streaked with gray. But her eyes, God, her eyes still held that fire he remembered, even if it flickered behind exhaustion now. She froze when she saw him, her hand still on the doorknob, her breath visibly caught. "Jonathan?" He swallowed, heart thudding wildly. "Emily." Ava looked between them, confused. "You two know each other?" Neither adult spoke. Emily opened the door wider, wordlessly, and Jonathan stepped inside, pulled by something he couldn't define: gravity, fate, guilt, love. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A fold-out couch, a tiny kitchenette, and a corner easel littered with paint tubes and brushes. A painting in progress leaned on the wall, a seascape, unfinished but beautiful. Emily turned toward Ava. "Sweetheart, can you go down and ask Miss Lorraine if she has any of those juice boxes left?" Ava's eyes widened. "But I just—" "Please, honey," Emily said more gently. "Just for a few minutes." Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She looked up at Jonathan. "Don't leave." "I won't," he promised. The door clicked shut behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jonathan's eyes roamed the room, over the signs of a life lived quietly, modestly. He turned to her, voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily's lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, resting her hands in her lap. "You made it clear that night that there was no space left for me in your world." "I was angry," he whispered, ashamed, hurt. "I thought you left on purpose. I thought you were done." "I wasn't," she said softly. "I was pregnant, Jonathan. I didn't even know until a few weeks after I left. I came back to tell you, but—" She looked away. "You'd already filed the paperwork. You changed your number. Your assistant said you didn't want to be contacted." He closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing hard. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." She nodded, more to herself than to him. "By then, it felt like the choice had been made for me. So I started over." He sat across from her, barely breathing. "She's ours." Emily nodded, tears brimming. "She's yours too, whether you want to be or not." The door opened and Ava came back in, juice box in hand. "Miss Lorraine said we owe her 2 hugs for this." Jonathan smiled softly, the ache in his chest turning tender. "I think that's a fair price." Ava plopped onto the floor and began to draw again with a stub of chalk. Emily stood and moved toward the window, her back turned. Jonathan rose and took a step closer. "I don't want to lose this again." Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "Then don't." Outside, the fog had started rolling in, curling around the bay like a secret whispered just out of reach. But inside room 203, something fragile and powerful had begun to mend, piece by piece, sketch by sketch, word by trembling word. The next morning, Jonathan stood at his kitchen counter, holding a French press with all the certainty of a man assembling a bomb. The stainless steel gleamed under the overhead lights of his high-rise apartment in Pacific Heights, but his focus was far away, back in that tiny motel room, in the moment Ava had reached for his hand without hesitation, as if she'd known him her whole life. He couldn't stop seeing Emily's face, those tired but defiant eyes, the way her fingers trembled when she spoke of the past, of the bridge he'd burned unknowingly, and the child who'd quietly grown up without him. He poured the coffee too quickly. It splashed over the rim and onto the counter, dark and bitter like the thoughts gnawing at him. He cursed under his breath and grabbed a towel, wiping with frustrated motions. Everything about yesterday had cracked something open in him, a life he thought he'd buried, a version of himself he barely remembered. She had been carrying his child. All those years he'd spent walking through boardrooms and building skylines. Ava had been learning how to walk, talk, draw, without him. And yet, she'd still smiled at him. Later that day, Jonathan returned to the motel, his heart pounding as he knocked on the familiar door. He didn't know what he expected. A slammed door, maybe, a demand to leave them alone. But it was Ava who answered, beaming. "You came back." "I said I would," he said gently. "And I meant it." She stepped aside and let him in, the sketchbook already open on the couch, colors scattered across the fabric. Emily looked up from the kitchen nook, her expression unreadable. "You want coffee?" she asked. "It's motel coffee, but it works." He nodded. "Sure, thank you." They sat in silence for a moment as the coffee brewed. Ava hummed under her breath and kept drawing, a new piece this time. Jonathan leaned over slightly. "What are you working on?" "It's you," she said matter-of-factly. "But not your suit version. The one who smiled yesterday." His chest tightened. That's the first time someone's drawn me without a suit in probably decades. Emily turned around with the 2 chipped mugs and set one in front of him. She has a way of seeing people. Always has. He studied her gently. "She got that from you." Emily gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Maybe once, a long time ago." They drank in silence for a few more minutes, the air thick with everything unspoken. Finally, Jonathan set his mug down and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, you and Ava shouldn't be here. This place is, it's what I can afford," Emily cut in, not unkindly. "Until something better comes along, I work part-time at the art supply store around the corner, and I clean apartments in the evenings." "I'm not judging," he said quickly, "but it's not right. She's a child. Your child. Our child." Emily sat down across from him, folding her hands carefully in her lap. "Jonathan, I didn't ask for help before because I didn't think you wanted to be found. I wasn't sure if I wanted to find you either, but now you're here. So, what are you offering exactly?" He swallowed, the weight of her question pushing on every nerve. "I don't know. I'm not here to fix things with a check or throw you into some penthouse tower." She raised an eyebrow. "You literally live in a penthouse tower?" "Okay, bad example," he conceded with a strained smile. "But I want to help, not just with money. I want to know Ava. I want to know you again. I want to understand how we got here. And how I didn't see it coming." Emily leaned back, tired eyes searching his face. "It wasn't just one moment, Jonathan. It was 100 little cracks. The late meetings, the emotional distance, the way you stopped looking at me like I mattered outside of your next big deal." "I know," he said softly, remorsefully. "I was chasing something because I thought that's what would keep me from falling apart. After we lost Lily." His voice broke, and for a second, he couldn't speak. Emily reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "I know. I was falling too." Ava suddenly bounded over, holding her new drawing triumphantly. "Ta-da! Look!" Jonathan took it with careful hands. It was him, standing beside a small girl, both of them holding giant brushes. Behind them, a giant sun rose over the Golden Gate Bridge. The details were crude, childish, but something about the image, about the hope in it, pierced him cleanly. "That's us?" he asked. Ava nodded eagerly. "I call it painter people. 'Cause you said you used to paint too, right?" He blinked, startled. "How did you know that?" "I saw a picture in the sketchbook," she said. "You and Mom. You looked happy." He looked to Emily. "You kept that?" She blushed slightly. "Some memories, even painful ones, are still worth keeping." Jonathan stood, then knelt beside Ava. "Would you want to come with me for a bit? Just the afternoon. I want to show you where I used to paint, before I forgot how." Ava looked to Emily for approval. Emily paused, then slowly nodded. Okay, Ava chirped, grabbing her hoodie. Can we get tacos too? Mom burns them. Jonathan laughed, genuinely, freely. Tacos, paint, and memories. That's the plan. As they stepped outside, the gray skies above began to part, revealing a sliver of sun, just enough to warm the sidewalk chalk beneath their feet, and just enough to let something begin again. The wind from the bay swept through Chrissy Field, tugging gently at Ava's hoodie as she skipped ahead, giggling, while Jonathan walked beside Emily in silence. The late afternoon sun glinted off the Golden Gate Bridge's towers, casting long shadows that danced across the grass. It had been over a decade since Jonathan had stepped foot here. The last time, he'd been holding Emily's hand, carefree, newly in love, filled with wild plans about starting an art co-op together. Back then, everything had felt infinite. Now, he was walking beside her again, but everything was different. Ava dashed ahead to a row of low boulders lining the beach path. "This is where I'll draw next," she declared proudly, pulling a folded paper from her backpack. "I brought extra crayons." Jonathan smiled, his voice soft. "You really love drawing, huh?" She nodded, kneeling to unpack her supplies. "It's how I talk when I don't know what to say." He blinked, caught off guard by the insight. He knelt beside her, glancing at the picture she'd started, an unfinished sketch of a woman standing on a dock with a little girl beside her. Emily came up behind them. "That's the dream Ava keeps having. She says the water always looks golden. She doesn't know why." Jonathan swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. "It's from that summer. The cabin on Shasta Lake. You were 6 months pregnant. The dock always glowed like that at sunset." Emily's breath hitched. "I thought I'd imagined that memory." He looked up at her quietly. "I never let myself remember it, not properly. It hurt too much." They fell silent, the weight of unspoken memories pressing gently between them. Jonathan watched as Ava shaded in the lake with care, tongue poking out in concentration. He turned to Emily, voice hesitant. "I don't want to overstep, but I've been thinking, maybe the two of you could stay at my place, just for a little while. It's more stable than the motel. She could have her own room." Emily's expression shifted from surprise to guarded doubt. "Jonathan." "No expectations," he said quickly. "No pressure, just safety. A warm bed, real food. I'll be around if you need help, and invisible if you don't. I promise." Emily studied him, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Why now? Why offer this now, when for 10 years you said nothing?" He nodded, fully owning the weight of her question. "Because for 10 years I thought you didn't want me. I thought you'd moved on, shut the door, and I let it close. And then yesterday, a little girl with your eyes and my stubbornness offered me a drawing and changed everything." Her gaze softened just enough to let the vulnerability show through. "It's not that simple, Jonathan." "I know," he replied earnestly. "But maybe we could start with something simple, like dinner." Ava looked up, delighted. "Tacos?" He laughed. "Absolutely. Tacos it is." Later that evening, the contrast couldn't have been more dramatic. Jonathan's condo in Pacific Heights stood high above the city, its sleek glass walls offering panoramic views of the bay. But despite its architectural elegance, the space had always felt sterile, silent, cold, untouched. Until tonight. Ava ran barefoot across the marble floor, chasing the scent of sizzling tortillas, her laughter echoing down the hallway. In the kitchen, Jonathan stood at the island with a recipe card Emily had handed him and a deep look of nervous concentration on his face. "You ever cooked these before?" Emily teased from the doorway. He shook his head. "I usually have a chef, or, well, DoorDash." She laughed. "God help us." Ava climbed onto a stool, chin resting on her hands as she watched her father attempt to flip tortillas in a cast-iron pan. Predictably, the first one tore in half. The second flopped out unevenly. The third one landed on the floor with a splat. Jonathan winced. Okay, I'm starting to appreciate the artistry of tacos. Ava burst into delighted giggles. You're terrible at this. I know, he groaned, but I'm trying. She hopped down and walked over, her small hands reaching for the spatula. Here, let me show you. You have to wait for the bubbles, then you flip. He stepped aside, humbled, letting her take over. Emily watched them from the doorway, arms crossed, something tender in her expression, like watching a moment she'd dreamed of but never thought she'd see. They ate together at the kitchen table, just the three of them. No servants, no assistants, no presentations or strategic agendas. Just food, laughter, and Ava insisting that guacamole counted as a vegetable. As Ava drifted off to sleep later on a plush daybed Jonathan had quickly prepared with spare linens, Emily walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window beside him. The city twinkled below, but her eyes were fixed on Ava, curled up peacefully, cradling her sketchbook. She looks safe, she said quietly. She is, he whispered, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep it that way. Emily nodded. Just don't disappear again. I won't, he promised fiercely. Not this time. And as they stood together in the glow of the city lights, a fragile new hope bloomed. One born not from grand gestures or perfect words, but from shared effort, from honest vulnerability, and from the kind of quiet promises that actually mean something. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Jonathan's condo, flooding the living room in soft amber light. Ava sat cross-legged on the oversized couch, humming to herself as she drew in a new sketchbook Jonathan had given her that morning, a gesture that had made her eyes light up like fireworks. She had insisted on decorating the first page with a drawing of breakfast tacos with a side of hope. Jonathan had laughed, not just chuckled politely, laughed, deeply, freely, like he hadn't in years. In the kitchen, he and Emily stood side by side making coffee, a comfortable silence between them. The rhythmic drip of the machine was oddly soothing. Emily glanced toward Ava and then at Jonathan. She really likes it here, she said quietly. He nodded. She makes this place feel like a home. I didn't even realize how silent it's been. Emily stirred a spoon through her mug, her gaze distant. She's never had anything like this. A real kitchen. A room with a window. Paint that doesn't peel off the wall when it rains. Jonathan's chest tightened. You've done so much with so little, Emily. I did what I had to, she replied, her tone matter-of-fact but not bitter. I just never expected to be doing it alone. Jonathan leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on the floor. I should have looked for you. I should have questioned more when you vanished after the divorce. I thought you left because you were done. Emily met his eyes, something raw flickering in hers. I didn't know I was pregnant, Jonathan. After the accident, things were blurry. I couldn't remember much. I was scared. And when pieces came back, it felt too late. He swallowed hard. Guilt, a slow ache in his throat. And now? I'm not sure what now even means, she said honestly. But Ava, she deserves the truth and stability. He nodded solemnly. You both do. Just then, Ava popped up from the couch and ran over, waving her sketchbook. Can we go to the museum today? I want to see the giant mural with the lady who has the wings. Jonathan smiled warmly. Of course, I'll cancel my meetings. Emily looked surprised. You don't have to do that. I want to, he said firmly. There's nothing more important. But as Jonathan reached for his phone to reschedule, a sharp vibration buzzed in his pocket. His assistant, again. The screen lit up with a dozen missed calls and a single text that made his blood run cold. Board crisis. You're being accused of exploiting a child for PR. Photos leaked. He stared at the words, heart pounding. Emily noticed his expression shift. What is it? He hesitated, then handed her the phone. She read the message slowly, jaw tightening as she handed it back. "So, it begins," she muttered. "What does that mean?" She walked to the window, arms crossed, voice clipped. "It means someone saw you with Ava, saw a story to twist, and now they're running with it. I've seen this happen before. They'll turn something beautiful into something scandalous." Jonathan shook his head. "No, I won't let them use her. This isn't a stunt. It never was." "I know that," Emily said, "but they don't care. They want a headline." He stared out at the skyline, tension coursing through his chest. "I need to get ahead of this. Control the narrative. Speak to the board." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. "So, you're going to fix this the way you fix everything else?" He looked at her confused. "You bulldoze your way through problems. You make calls, pull strings, write checks, but this, us, can't be fixed with power plays. You have to protect her as a father, not a CEO." Her words struck him deeply, because she was right. All his life he'd led with strategy, leverage, control, but none of that mattered here, not with a 6-year-old girl who believed in sidewalk art and breakfast tacos. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "Not to hide, not to spin this, but I will defend her, publicly, if I have to." Ava stood silently in the doorway, having heard enough to know something was wrong. Her voice was timid. "Am I in trouble?" Jonathan turned instantly, kneeling in front of her. "No, sweetheart. Never. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just don't understand. Like the kids at school who laugh when I wear my rainbow boots?" she asked innocently. Jonathan's chest tightened. "Exactly like that. But you know what? Those boots are awesome." She smiled. "I know." That night, Jonathan wrote a personal statement, not as a CEO, but as a father, a man who discovered something infinitely more valuable than profit margins. A daughter who drew sidewalk murals with more honesty than half the men he'd ever negotiated with. He sent it to his board and posted a version on his company's private Slack channel. Then he turned off his phone. In the quiet that followed, he sat with Ava and Emily on the living room floor, surrounded by open sketchbooks and watercolors. No cameras, no reporters, just stories in color. Ava drew 3 stick figures standing on a rooftop, all holding hands. In the background, the sun shined in bold yellow strokes. She leaned in close and whispered, "I think this one's my favorite." Jonathan looked at the drawing, then at her, eyes misty. "Mine too." It began with a knock. Not the soft, uncertain knock of someone unsure they belong, but a sharp, assertive rap that echoed through the penthouse walls like a warning shot. Jonathan opened the door, expecting a courier or concierge. Instead, a man in a too-tight blazer and sunglasses that barely concealed the smugness beneath stood there, holding a manila envelope. "You, Jonathan Miles?" the man asked coolly. "Yes." The man handed him the envelope. "You've been served. Have a nice day." And with that he turned on his heel, leaving Jonathan staring at the envelope as if it were ticking. He tore it open with trembling fingers. At the top, "Petition for emergency custody hearing," filed by one Brandon Keyes, a name he'd never heard. The document claimed Brandon was Ava's biological father and that Jonathan had manipulated both Ava and Emily for personal and professional gain. "What the hell is this?" Jonathan muttered aloud. From the hallway, Ava's voice drifted. "What's wrong, Uncle John?" He quickly stuffed the document under a newspaper on the console table. "Nothing, kiddo. Just boring grown-up stuff?" But his heart pounded. Every word of that petition buzzed in his mind like a swarm of wasps. He turned to find Emily walking out of the guest room with a laundry basket, her face calm until she saw his. "What is it?" she asked, voice instantly alert. He held out the document. She read it in silence, her face shifting from confusion to shock to something far darker. Anger. This is insane. Brandon? He's a guy I dated briefly before I regained my memory. He was never involved with Ava, never even met her. Jonathan paced the room, agitated. Then how does he know enough to file for custody? Emily's eyes narrowed. We had a mutual friend. I told her bits and pieces after my memory returned. Maybe too much. I guess word got around when people saw the press storm around you. So, he's an opportunist, Jonathan said bitterly. Sees headlines, sees money, and tries to cash in. Emily nodded. But this could get ugly. It's already ugly, he replied, eyes flaring with determination. He's not taking her. Not now, not ever. The hearing was scheduled for the end of the week. Jonathan moved fast, hiring a family law attorney, gathering statements, contacting Ruth from the shelter to vouch for Emily's consistent presence in Ava's life. But the worst blow came 2 days later when a tabloid posted a photo of Ava in Jonathan's arms at the museum, captioned, CEO plays daddy for the cameras. That night, Ava sat at the kitchen table, her sketchbook untouched, a frown darkening her usually radiant face. They showed my picture on TV, she whispered. Jonathan kneeled beside her. I know. I'm so sorry. Are they mad at me? No, sweetheart, he said, brushing hair from her face. They're confused, and sometimes people say things they don't understand just to get attention. Will they take me away? Her voice cracked. Jonathan's throat tightened. No, I won't let that happen. She looked at him with a seriousness far beyond her years. Promise? He placed a hand over his heart. I swear, I will fight for you, with everything I have. That night, when Emily checked on Ava, she found her fast asleep, clutching her sketchbook like a teddy bear. On the open page was a drawing of a stick figure man with a cape labeled, My Real Dad. Emily showed it to Jonathan without a word. He sat on the edge of the bed, tears stinging his eyes. I missed 6 years of her life, he whispered. I can't lose another second. You're not going to, Emily said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But this fight won't be fair. Brandon's team is already leaking stories to the press. Then we fight louder, with truth, Jonathan said resolutely. Let the public see who she really is, who we really are. Emily hesitated, then asked, Do you think we should go public? Tell the full story? Jonathan turned to her. Let Ava speak through her art. And just like that, an idea took root. The next day, Jonathan called in favors, pulled strings quietly but purposefully. Within 48 hours, he secured a gallery space near a fisherman's wharf. Not to promote himself, but to exhibit something pure, something that couldn't be twisted by lawyers or spin doctors. Ava's drawings, dozens of them, scenes of her tiny world, her mom, the shelter, the tacos, Jonathan made badly but lovingly, and in each a consistent theme, connection, a child's dream of family. He printed the flyer himself. Through Ava's eyes, a story in crayon. Admission, free. Donations, optional. All proceeds to benefit children's mental health organizations and local shelters. On the night of the exhibit, the small gallery filled with journalists, families, and curious visitors. No press conference, no red carpet, just Ava, standing shyly in front of her drawings, holding Jonathan's hand. A single photo from that night, a candid of Ava pointing proudly to a picture titled, Me and My Dad at the Museum, would go viral. But that came later. For now, as Ava hugged him tightly that night and whispered, Thank you for seeing me, Jonathan knew something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just defending Ava's right to stay. He was defending her right to be loved. The courtroom was colder than Jonathan expected. Not physically, though the marble floors and towering windows didn't help, but emotionally. There was a sterile stillness that made every movement feel too loud, every breath too visible. Emily sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face was calm, but he could feel the storm beneath it. Across the aisle, Brandon Keyes lounged like a man on a magazine cover, tan, smug, with a practiced grin and an overpriced suit 2 sizes too tight. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Carla Hensley, adjusted her thick glasses and whispered something into his ear, eliciting a nod and a satisfied smirk. Ava wasn't in the room. Thank God. Ruth had taken her to the library, promising puzzles and popsicles and no courtrooms. "Don't let him rattle you," Emily whispered as the bailiff called the room to order. "I won't," Jonathan murmured, but his jaw clenched instinctively. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a nameplate that read Honorable Teresa Monroe, reviewed the file in front of her. Her voice was even, but her gaze cut through the air like a scalpel. "We are here to determine whether the petition filed by Mr. Brandon Keyes for temporary custody of minor Ava Monroe is founded on legitimate grounds. All parties will be heard." Carla rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client had a consensual relationship with Ms. Monroe during the period consistent with Ava's conception. When he recently learned of Ava's existence and the environment she was being raised in, he exercised his legal right to seek custody." Jonathan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have DNA test results that confirm Mr. Keyes is not Ava's biological father. Moreover, Ava has never known him. His appearance in her life is recent and opportunistic." Carla smiled thinly. "And what about Mr. Miles? What exactly is his relationship to Ava? He is not her father either. He is her mother's ex-husband, a wealthy man exploiting a vulnerable woman and child for public sympathy, if not marketing advantage." A murmur stirred among the gallery. Jonathan inhaled deeply, his voice low. "Here we go." Emily stood then, not waiting for the cue. "May I speak?" Judge Monroe gestured. "You may." Emily's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Your Honor, I made mistakes. I lost years to amnesia, to confusion, to fear, but I raised Ava with love, with everything I had. Mr. Keyes was never part of that. He never showed up when we were hungry. He didn't hold her hand when she had nightmares. He didn't paint with her or teach her how to tell time or sit through hours of her drawing butterflies." She paused, visibly trembling, but not backing down. "Jonathan may not be Ava's biological father, but he is her family. He's the one she trusts. The one who came back without hesitation, who saw her and didn't look away. And in case anyone's forgotten, Ava isn't some trophy to be won. She's a little girl who deserves stability, not drama." Judge Monroe nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Monroe." Carla rose again, clearly displeased. "Your Honor, we have video footage of Mr. Miles parading Ava in front of the press at a gallery event. Is that stability or showmanship?" Jonathan stood. "May I respond?" The judge eyed him, then gave a subtle nod. "I didn't parade her. She asked me to hold her hand. It was her idea to share her drawings. She wanted the world to see her life through her eyes. That gallery? It wasn't a PR stunt. It was her voice, finally being heard." His voice cracked, and he didn't hide it. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know Ava existed until a few weeks ago. But since I've met her, she's turned my world right side up. I would burn my whole company to the ground if it meant keeping her safe. She is not a means to an end. She is the end." Silence fell across the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Even Carla sat down without a word. Judge Monroe tapped her gavel gently. "I've heard enough." She scanned both parties with a steady gaze. "I have reviewed the submitted evidence, including the DNA test, character statements, and financial disclosures. Mr. Keyes, there is no legal standing for this petition. Ava Monroe is not your daughter, and the court finds no compelling reason to consider your claim further. This petition is hereby dismissed." Brandon leapt to his feet. "You can't just—" The judge slammed her gavel once, hard. "Mr. Keyes, you are out of order. You may leave voluntarily, or I will have the bailiff assist you." He stormed out, muttering curses that echoed too loudly. When the doors shut behind him, a deep exhale filled the room. Emily gripped Jonathan's hand. "You did it." "No," he said softly. "We did." Later, in the courthouse corridor, Ruth arrived with Ava in tow. She ran to them, oblivious to the legal chaos that had just unraveled inside. "Can we get pancakes now?" she asked brightly. Jonathan smiled, bending to lift her in his arms. "Absolutely, kiddo. And you can even have extra syrup." As they walked toward the parking lot, Emily leaned into his side. "She really is our bridge, isn't she?" she murmured. Jonathan looked at Ava, her face pressed into his shoulder, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "She's more than that," he whispered. "She's our whole reason." The Monday after the custody hearing, the sunlight over San Francisco was golden but thin, like it hadn't made up its mind to stay. Ava clutched Jonathan's hand tightly as they approached her new public school, a stately brick building in the inner Sunset District, not far from Golden Gate Park. It was the kind of place where laughter from the playground could be heard from blocks away, but where the quiet corners often held heavier stories. Emily had picked out Ava's outfit that morning, a soft lavender sweater, jeans with stars embroidered on the cuffs, and her favorite pink sneakers. Jonathan had braided her hair himself, clumsily but lovingly, earning a giggle from Ava and an approving smile from Emily. "I'll pick you up right here after class," Jonathan said as they approached the front steps. Ava glanced up, her voice hesitant. "You promise?" Jonathan knelt beside her. "Cross my heart." "Okay," she whispered, letting go of his hand with a sigh that felt much older than her years. He watched her walk toward the doors, her backpack bouncing, her steps slow but determined. A teacher greeted her warmly, but Ava barely responded. Her eyes were scanning, reading the room before she entered, just as Jonathan did before every business deal. That evening, when she came home, her silence told them everything. Emily crouched beside her on the welcome mat. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" Ava shrugged. "Okay." Jonathan leaned in gently. "Did anything happen?" "I just don't want to talk," she murmured, slipping out of her shoes and walking straight to her room. They gave her space, but when they checked on her later, she was curled on the bed, sketchbook closed beside her, eyes wet but not spilling. At dinner, she picked at her food. No more questions were asked. The following day, Jonathan walked her in again, this time hanging back a few more feet. He watched as a group of kids pointed at Ava, whispering. "That's the girl from the video," one boy said loudly, "the one with the dad who cried." Another chimed in. "My mom said it was all fake, that he just wanted attention." Ava stood there, her jaw tightening. She didn't run, didn't cry. She just walked past them like a soldier who'd seen war before the rest of the platoon even got their boots on. That night, Jonathan sat on the porch steps, his head in his hands. Emily joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "She's being bullied, isn't she?" he asked quietly. "She is," Emily replied, her voice thick. "But she doesn't want us to fight for her, not yet. She's trying to figure out if she can fight for herself." Jonathan swallowed hard. "And what if she can't?" "Then we teach her that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just about staying soft when everything around you wants to harden you." The next day, Ruth showed up at their doorstep with a carton of lemon cupcakes and a handmade "You got this" card. Ava hugged her tight. "We all heard," Ruth said gently. "Want to talk about it?" Ava nodded slowly. "Some kid said, 'I was on the internet, that my dad's a liar.'" "And what do you think?" Ruth asked, kneeling to her level. "I think people are scared of stories they don't understand," Ava whispered, "and they say mean things because they don't want it to be true for them." Jonathan stood nearby, stunned by her insight. Ruth smiled, her eyes glassy. "That's very wise, Ava. I just want to be normal," she continued. "I don't want to be the girl from the video. I just want to draw, and maybe have one friend." Later that week, Emily had an idea. She arranged with the school to let Ava do a short show and tell about her drawings, to give her the floor before the narrative could be twisted again. Jonathan was nervous, but Ava agreed. When Friday arrived, Ava stood at the front of the classroom, her drawings clipped neatly to a trifold board. She cleared her throat once, eyes flicking to the back of the room where Jonathan stood, hands trembling behind his back. "This is my drawing of a bridge," Ava began softly, "because sometimes families fall apart like broken roads, but bridges help us get back to each other." The class was quiet. "This one is a tree. It's for my mom. She lost her memories, but she's still rooted, still strong." She paused, then held up her final drawing, a sketch of a man holding a little girl's hand in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. "And this is my dad. He didn't know I existed, but when he found me, he didn't run." No one laughed. No one whispered. After class, a girl named Sarah walked up to her. "My parents got divorced last year. I drew a volcano. You want to sit with me at lunch?" Ava nodded, eyes wide with quiet hope. That evening, Jonathan stood with Emily in the kitchen, stirring spaghetti sauce as Ava hummed in the next room. "She's learning to breathe again," Emily said, watching him. Jonathan stirred slowly. "She's teaching me how." They shared a look, heavy with gratitude, but also fear, because the world would always throw stones. But for now, inside their home, they were laying bricks, one kindness at a time. By Monday morning, the video of Ava's show and tell had quietly found its way onto social media. At first, it seemed harmless. Someone, likely a teacher with good intentions, had uploaded a short clip showing Ava standing in front of her trifold board, nervously clutching her drawing of the bridge. But something about her trembling voice, her words, "Bridges help us get back to each other," caught fire. By Tuesday afternoon, the video had surpassed 1 million views. By Wednesday, the headlines followed. "CEO's lost daughter melts hearts in viral video." From scandal to redemption, Jonathan Miles and the little girl who drew her family back together. Jonathan had barely stepped into the Ocean District office when Diane, his assistant, intercepted him. "Jonathan, you need to see this." He followed her into the conference room, where a screen displayed a live broadcast. The local news anchor smiled softly as they replayed a portion of Ava's speech, then cut to clips of Jonathan at public events, smiling, nodding, once wiping his eye as Ava presented her artwork. The media had their narrative, and they weren't letting go. He turned off the monitor with a sigh. "Who gave them the footage?" Diane shifted uncomfortably. "The school says it was uploaded anonymously, but I pulled some metadata. It was posted from an IP address linked to one of the board members' homes." Jonathan's mouth tightened. Paul Martin. The name tasted bitter. Paul had always resented Jonathan's leadership, especially since Jonathan had sidelined him on the last expansion project. Using Ava, his child, for corporate sabotage crossed a line Jonathan didn't even know existed. By the time he returned home, Emily already had the news open on the TV, her jaw clenched. Ava was asleep on the couch, a half-eaten grilled cheese on the plate beside her. "She hasn't seen it yet," Emily said quietly. Jonathan nodded. "Good." He sat beside her, eyes on the screen. "We knew something like this might happen." Emily's voice was low and furious. "But not from someone in your own company." The next morning brought more chaos. A few tabloids ran stories questioning Ava's paternity again, despite the DNA tests. Others speculated whether Jonathan was using the situation to boost his company's brand image. The same old accusations. new packaging. But this time, Ava felt it. She came home with her backpack slung low, her shoulders tighter than usual. Jonathan and Emily watched her trudge through the doorway. "How was school?" Emily asked gently. Ava dropped her bag. "Sarah didn't talk to me today." Jonathan knelt down, concerned. What happened? She said her mom doesn't want her being friends with someone who's part of a publicity stunt. Ava's lip quivered. She said my whole life is just pretend for the cameras. Jonathan felt like the floor cracked beneath him. Ava? No, that's not true. Tears welled in her eyes. Then why are people saying it? Why do people care what I draw? I didn't ask for any of this. Emily pulled her into a hug as Ava broke down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. Jonathan's fists clenched helplessly. He'd spent his entire adult life managing crises, fixing broken buildings, steering billion-dollar developments, but he had no blueprint for this. That night, after Ava had cried herself to sleep, Emily and Jonathan sat at the kitchen table in silence. The only light came from the pendant lamp above, casting a soft golden halo over the mess of sketches, art supplies, and news clippings. "I should have stopped it," Jonathan murmured. "I should have pulled her out of that school the second they uploaded the video." Emily looked up. "We can't lock her away from the world." "No," he agreed. "But we can protect her better than this." She nodded slowly, reaching for his hand. "Then let's protect her. Together." The following morning, Jonathan called a press conference, not from his office, not in front of investors, but in the lobby of the children's museum Ava loved. He stood at the podium in a simple blazer, no tie, his voice steady but intimate. "I'm not here as a CEO," he began. "I'm here as a father, one who missed the first 6 years of his daughter's life and is trying to make up for it, not with headlines, not with PR, but with presence. With love." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "My daughter is not a trend. She is not content. And if you come for her again, I will make sure the law sees it for what it is: exploitation." The clip aired live. The reaction was swift. Hashtags flooded Twitter, #, let Ava draw, #bridge back together, #protect Ava. By evening, even Sarah's mom issued a public apology on social media, blaming her misplaced judgment on media misinformation. Jonathan sat on Ava's bed that night, stroking her hair. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked softly. "Every word," he whispered. Ava smiled faintly. "Can I draw you tomorrow, holding me?" His voice caught, just a little. "Only if you draw yourself smiling." "I think I will," she murmured. "I think I can." The gymnasium buzzed with the energy of parents, kids, and paper streamers. Foldable tables were set up in rows, each decorated with markers, crayons, and laminated signs declaring names and grade levels. The scent of construction paper and Elmer's glue hung in the air, sticky with nostalgia. Jonathan stood at the entrance of Lincoln Elementary, holding a single bouquet of wildflowers Ava had once said reminded her of happiness after rain. In his other hand, he carried a carefully wrapped frame, his own contribution, quietly tucked beside hers for the exhibit. He hadn't drawn in over 20 years. But last night, alone in his studio, he let his pencil speak. "Over here, Daddy!" Ava waved furiously from the far side of the gym, her cheeks flushed with excitement, her pigtails bouncing with every step. She wore a denim jumper covered in glitter paint, and Emily trailed behind her, beaming. Jonathan's heart swelled as he crossed the room. It wasn't the awards, the speeches, or the cameras that mattered now. It was the way Ava ran to him like he'd been hers all along. Her tiny hands grabbed the bouquet. "You remembered." "Of course I did," Jonathan said, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "You said yellow daisies meant smiles. I figured you'd need a few extra today." She giggled, then turned to lead him toward her display table. On the easel stood her main piece, a new drawing of the Golden Gate Bridge. But this time, the 3 stick figures beneath it weren't faceless. One had a paintbrush, one had long hair, one had a crayon tucked behind their ear. It was the 3 of them, Jonathan, Emily, and Ava, together under the bridge. Jonathan knelt beside the table, awestruck. "You really think I'm part of your family picture now?" Ava looked up at him, earnest. "You were always in it. I just couldn't draw you yet." He didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat tightened too much to allow words. As more parents trickled in, Jonathan caught sight of Principal Diaz approaching with a clipboard. She smiled warmly, clearly charmed by Ava's work. "This is beautiful, Mr. Miles. She has such a natural sense of storytelling." "She gets it from her mom," Jonathan replied, squeezing Emily's hand. Softly, just then, Ava tugged at his sleeve. "Did you bring yours?" Jonathan hesitated, then nodded and handed her the wrapped frame. She unwrapped it carefully, gasping at the soft charcoal sketch inside. It was a rough but intimate drawing of her from memory, sitting on the sidewalk, chalk in hand, eyes wide with wonder. He'd titled it, First Light. Ava stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Can we put it next to mine?" "Only if you think it belongs there." She nodded fiercely and set it beside her bridge. "Now it's complete." Across the room, someone clapped, too sharply, too theatrically. Jonathan turned, his stomach sinking. Paul Martin stood at the door, dressed not like a parent, but like a politician. Blazer, slacks, smug expression intact. Trailing behind him was a reporter from a local business channel, camera already rolling. Emily stiffened. Jonathan gently stepped in front of Ava, shielding her with a natural, instinctive movement. "What do you want, Paul?" he asked quietly, his voice taut. Paul feigned surprise. "Just here to support the community, of course. But since you asked, we do have a few follow-up questions about your redeemed fatherhood narrative. You've built quite the brand lately." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "This isn't a stage, Paul. It's a school gym. She's 6. Paul smiled coldly. "And yet her stories captured more attention than any ad campaign you've ever run. Investors are curious how much of that story is sculpted." The comment was bait. Jonathan didn't take it. Instead, he turned to the cameraman. "She's a child. If you record anything today, let it be the joy of a little girl sharing her world, not the politics of grown men who should know better." Paul's smirk faltered. Principal Diaz stepped forward, firm and polite. "I'm sorry, sir. Unauthorized media isn't allowed in student spaces. Please leave." Reluctantly, Paul and the reporter exited, but not before muttering something about public relations spin. Jonathan exhaled slowly, returning to Ava's side. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Was that man trying to ruin my art show?" Jonathan knelt again, wrapping his arms around her. "No," he said softly, "but even if he tried, he'd never understand it. This," he gestured to the bridge, to their 2 pieces side by side, "is stronger than anything he could say." As the event wound down, Ava stood proudly beside her drawings, accepting compliments with the poise of someone twice her age. Parents stopped to admire Jonathan's sketch too, asking where he studied, what inspired him. He gave vague answers, staying humble, because none of it mattered, not the praise, not the media whispers. What mattered was when Ava looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." He kissed her forehead, voice cracking with affection. "I'll never leave again, not for anything." The letter arrived 2 days later, neatly folded, tucked inside a manila envelope, and stamped with the seal of the Superior Court of San Francisco. Emily found it first. She stood in the kitchen, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it to Jonathan. Her eyes said everything before he even opened it. Jonathan read it once, then again, slower. The language was cold, clinical, legal. A motion had been filed. Paul Martin was challenging custody, not directly, but through a vague but dangerous claim, that Emily, due to her prior memory loss, was unfit to provide Ava with long-term psychological stability, and that Ava deserved a structured household guided by legal precedent and financial sustainability. In short, Paul was weaponizing the past. Again. Jonathan sat down heavily at the kitchen table. The room, just moments earlier filled with the aroma of tomato soup and the echo of Ava's singing in the next room, now seemed suffocating. "I thought we were past this," Emily whispered, her voice shaky. "I thought, after everything, we were safe." Jonathan reached across the table, gripping her hand. "We are safe. He's trying to shake us, but we're stronger now." Emily tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. What if the court listens to him? Jonathan leaned forward, voice steady. "Then we speak louder, not with anger, with truth." He called their attorney, Monica Reyes, that afternoon. A sharp, seasoned woman with a calm fire in her voice, Monica listened carefully as Jonathan explained everything, from Emily's recovery to the art show to the incident with the reporter. "Do you have the documentation of Emily's medical treatment?" she asked. "I do," Jonathan replied, "and I have the gallery's footage from Ava's show, when Paul showed up." "Good, we'll use it. And Jonathan," Monica paused, her voice softening, "you've already proven something more powerful than any affidavit. You didn't run. That counts. In family court, commitment matters." That night, Jonathan found Ava on the balcony, curled in a blanket with her sketchbook in her lap. She didn't look up when he approached. "Mom said something bad might happen," she said. Quietly, Jonathan knelt beside her. "There are people who don't understand what we have. Sometimes they try to break things they don't understand. Are they going to take me away?" The question landed like a gut punch. Jonathan inhaled, deeply, deliberately. "No," he said. "Not if I have anything to do with it, and I promise you, I do." Ava leaned against him, her small hand finding his. "Can I draw in court, if we have to go?" Jonathan smiled, blinking away tears. "If you want to. I think your drawings say things even adults forget how to say." The court date was set for the following week. The courtroom was small, impersonal, but heavy with tension. Ava sat between Emily and Jonathan at the plaintiff's table, her crayon box beside her coloring book. Monica stood confidently, her notes prepared, but her greatest weapon was the truth she carried in the form of testimony, documents, and video footage. Paul arrived with his lawyer, smug and coiffed, acting as if he were walking into a corporate boardroom. As the hearing began, Paul's attorney outlined a version of events that painted Emily as unstable, unpredictable. He used phrases like cognitive lapse, emotional inconsistency, and questionable cohabitation. He claimed Jonathan had manipulated Emily during recovery to create a media narrative that benefited his reputation. Jonathan's fists clenched under the table, but Monica gently tapped his wrist. "Stay calm." Then it was their turn. Monica spoke with quiet force, laying out Emily's medical treatment, therapy records, Ava's steady school performance, and Jonathan's ongoing support, documented not through headlines, but through home life, teacher testimonials, pediatrician notes, even Ava's artwork. Finally, Monica stepped back and said, "Your Honor, if I may, Ava has something she'd like to share." Judge Bell, a seasoned man with warm eyes and a weathered face, nodded. Ava stood hesitantly, holding up a single drawing. "This is my family," she said. "This is my mom. This is me. This is Jonathan, my dad." There was a pause, soft and fragile. "He helps me with math. He reads with funny voices. He made tacos, but burned them. He says we're a team." She turned to Paul. "I don't know you, but I know what it feels like when someone makes you feel like you matter, and I want to stay with the people who make me feel that way." Silence blanketed the courtroom. Judge Bell cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ava." Paul's lawyer objected on procedural grounds, but the judge waved it off. "This isn't just a legal matter, it's a human one." 30 minutes later, the ruling came. Custody remained with Emily and Jonathan. Paul's claim was dismissed as opportunistic and without sufficient cause. The courtroom exhaled as one. Outside, as sunlight streamed through the courthouse doors, Ava burst into tears of relief, wrapping her arms around both her parents. "We get to go home," she whispered. Jonathan looked to Emily, his eyes glassy. "No, we are home." It was the first Sunday of spring when the city breathed softer. The wind carried warmth for the first time in months, and the sunlight spilling over San Francisco's rooftops felt like a long-awaited embrace. Jonathan stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the sleeves of his shirt. Not a suit, not even a dress shirt, but something simple. Crisp linen, sky blue. Ava had picked it out. "You look less like a boss and more like a dad," she had giggled. Today wasn't about business. Today was about something far more permanent. He stepped into the living room, where Emily adjusted Ava's hair ribbon with gentle fingers. She turned to Jonathan, smiling in that way she hadn't done since before the storm of the courtroom, since before the past came knocking again. "You ready?" she asked. Jonathan exhaled. "More than I ever thought I'd be." Together, they made their way to the small gallery on Chestnut Street, nestled between a bookstore and a cafe. Outside hung a modest banner. 3 generations of color, from past to present. It was the first exhibit hosted by the new nonprofit Jonathan had launched just a month prior, an organization dedicated to giving young artists from underserved communities a place to create, display, and be seen. But this opening, it was personal. Inside, the space buzzed with quiet admiration. Families, teachers, and a few curious collectors wandered the gallery, stopping in front of bright canvases and whimsical sketches. At the center of it all stood a circular display, half filled with sketches from Jonathan's college years, delicate, raw, idealistic, and half with Ava's watercolors. Her flowers, her imaginary creatures, her family portraits, all signed with her name, followed by a tiny heart. In one corner, framed prominently, hung a new piece. It depicted 3 figures holding hands beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, just as Ava had drawn it in chalk on that sidewalk months ago. But this one shimmered in vibrant acrylic, signed Ava Miles, age 6, family. A hush fell over the crowd as the gallery lights dimmed and Jonathan stepped onto the small platform at the front. He didn't need notes. "Not long ago," he began, his voice low but certain, "I believed art was something I had to give up. I buried it along with the grief of a loss I never made peace with." He paused, glancing at Emily and Ava, who stood just beneath the stage, their eyes locked on his. "But someone reminded me that creation isn't just about beauty, it's about healing, about reclaiming the pieces of ourselves we thought were too broken to be seen." There were nods, a few murmurs of agreement. He continued, "Today's exhibit features 3 generations of artists, my sketches, Ava's paintings, and, though she doesn't know it yet, one unfinished canvas that belongs to Emily, a mother, a survivor, and a woman whose story deserves to be told." Emily's eyes welled with tears, and she laughed through them. "You always did put me on display." The audience chuckled warmly. Jonathan stepped down and approached the easel that had been left blank throughout the afternoon. On the tray lay a single paintbrush, new and clean. He picked it up, turned to Ava. "Want to help me start this one?" Ava beamed. "Can we paint the bridge again?" "The bridge, and maybe the view from home?" He handed her the brush. "You start." As she laid down the first streak of crimson-orange, mimicking the glow of sunset over water, Emily stepped forward and placed her hand gently on Jonathan's back. "This wasn't what I pictured for my life," she whispered, "but I've never felt more like myself than I do now." "Funny," he said quietly. "Me too." Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long golden lines across the sidewalk. Ava's classmates filed in with their parents, pointing excitedly at her name under the framed paintings. Back inside, Monica, their lawyer-turned-friend, smiled from the back of the room. "Guess some cases really do end with everyone winning." Later, as the gallery lights dimmed and the last guests drifted out, the three of them stood before the unfinished canvas. The first line was Ava's. The second, a bold brushstroke of green, was Emily's. Jonathan added the third, a swirl of soft gray-blue, like morning fog rolling in over the bay. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was real. And, sometimes, Jonathan realized, that's all a family really needs. Back at home, they ended the night with grilled cheese sandwiches and a messy game of Pictionary. Jonathan lost miserably but didn't mind. As he helped Emily tuck Ava into bed, the little girl turned to him sleepily. "Daddy?" she murmured. He paused, heart full. "Yes, sweetheart? I think our art brought us home." Jonathan kissed her forehead gently. "I think you're right." As he closed the door, the final line of Ava's newest drawing sat pinned to her wall in crayon letters. "Sometimes the art we leave behind leads us home."